As of February 18th, 2026, a new trailer for The Mandalorian and Grogu has been released. The movie itself is coming out May 22nd, okay? So it's going for a summer release. That's traditionally worked out for Disney Star Wars. This is coming on the heels of the very awkward Super Bowl trailer, which I actually thought was I liked it. It was kind of funny. And I understood what they were going for, but it was just a bad move because Star Wars does not have the cultural capital that it once did, that you could get away with something kind of fun and goofy. That trailer coming out after Mando Season 1 would have been great. We are post-Mandalorian Season 3. Star Wars needs to hit home runs, and I think that's going to be the consistent thing that we look at as I get to the point of this video. What would it take for The Mandalorian and Grogu to be good? There's a lot of pessimism about the major franchises like Star Wars and Marvel and DC on the internet nowadays, and I want to balance that out. I am personally pessimistic about all these things, but I also want to talk about, like, what would it take? What would it take for these things to work out? Because I want to like them. I want to be a fan of them. I'm a long-term Star Wars fan. So here's what I'm looking for. It's like, this needs to stick. Because I am a long-term Star Wars fan, but what I'm hoping that these companies are starting to realize is that brand loyalty is not a guarantee the way it was 10 years ago. I like Star Wars, but I also like things that are good, and I don't have unlimited money, so I'm not going to go spend it on things that are bad if I don't have to. So this video will be divided into 3 parts. First, what is it going to take to be good? What do we get from the trailer that's positive? And then what are my concerns? So first and foremost, higher production value than the show. I didn't hear a ton of people talk about this during the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian, which were still like very good and had a lot of goodwill surrounding them. But any time that the show takes place in anything other than sort of a vast desert or an enclosed space somewhere, be it a cave or the Razor Crest or something, you start to see how cheap the show looks. And this, of course, famously or infamously comes from the use of the volume, which was pioneered on The Mandalorian, which looks great for stark, blank backgrounds. It does not look good when you need something to look cinema quality. Other shows and other media have used the volume very well by just incorporating it in with more traditional sets, locations, and CGI. But it's the overreliance on the volume as sort of a cop-out to not spend a ton of money on an expensive Star Wars show is what, in some ways, is what doomed a lot of the Disney Plus shows. They just look bad. They look awful. So this movie cannot have any of that cheapness. It needs to look like a movie. It needs to look like a good movie. It needs to look like a good movie with Disney money. Secondly, meaningful world building. Disney Star Wars has been lacking in world building, mostly in the way of in-universe politics. You can kind of tell that these things are being made by fans of the original trilogy. I got some interesting comments on my last Star Wars video about Solo from people who just gave up on Star Wars after Return of the Jedi, or even before Return of the Jedi. They hate the Ewoks and that kind of thing, which is, I think, an interesting point of view. I'm a prequels Clone Wars kid, so I don't feel that way, but I think it's cool to talk to people who have that view. And I think what it reveals about the mindset of a lot of the boomers and Gen Xers that are creating these new Star Wars things is that they really love Star Wars being the story of small groups of people going on sort of fantasy action adventures. The prequels changed the game, and that's the Star Wars that I am conditioned to, and the most vocal Star Wars fans now are conditioned to. The most vocal Star Wars fans, and this shift started around when Rogue One was coming out in 2016, are fans who grew up with the prequel and with Clone Wars. And what we are used to is knowing what's going on at the top of this universe, what's going on with the Senate, what's going on with the military, what's going on with the leaders of galactic government, what's going on with the leaders of the galactic underworld. In the original trilogy, it doesn't matter whether Jabba is like the biggest crime lord ever, but thanks to Clone Wars, we understand where the Hutt cartel fits in with all these other different things. Mandalorian and Grogu, if it wants to have any sticking power with this Star Wars audience, it needs to do more of that. And also, like I said in my last Star Wars video, this needs to be a definitive story of some kind. I made a whole point in that video about how like Mando characters and Rebels characters are not enough to tell the really definitive stories you need to tell. The inclusion of characters like Zeb and Embo, who are both minor characters in the grand scheme of things, even though I think they're both great, it's not enough, so I hope they're used well. But I don't know, just we need something. Give us something, tell us something definitive about what's going on in this galaxy. Thirdly, I think this movie needs to have a degree of stand-aloneness, and there are 2 ways of going about that, one that I think is bad and one that I think is good. The good version is being a standalone like Rogue One or even Solo, in which there's a lot of other things going on that you can use to spin off of. You can use that for sequels, you can use it for prequels, but it stands on its own, ultimately. Then there's MCU style standaloneness, which means this is just one piece in a larger puzzle, and so this piece doesn't have to be of very high quality. You just need to get the character from A to B to keep it in your consciousness and establish a few details here and there, which worked for about a decade of the MCU, and it worked for nobody else in no other context. So why they would keep trying to do that, I don't know. Lastly, there needs to be a maturing tone. Mando Season 1 had a relatively kind of dark tone, and I am not a fan of dark and gritty for the sake of dark and gritty. I don't think that's objectively better. But this character, in his setting, being on the fringes of the galaxy, being this bounty hunter, you need to have a level of, like, darkness there and ruthlessness. Otherwise, where it says the story is taking place, it's not going to feel like it's taking place there. And speaking of maturity, we need to see Grogu growing up. This is something I didn't hear many people talk about, this could just be me, but I found it very annoying that they tried to have Grogu kind of do action-y things, but also still be a baby, trying to have their cake and eat it too. We need to have him take more agency, but we also want to keep the marketable cuteness. It's not going to work. He needs to actually grow up. I think it kind of ruins every moment that he's in, where he's doing something kind of like goofy and action-y, and they're kind of playing it for laughs. And then that's basically a third of season 3 of this show. And there's a lot of that in the trailer, so I hope that's kind of toned down, or I hope he actually starts to, in some ways, grow up a little bit so that we can get something more from his character. Because he didn't advance at all in any way, and he has to advance in some way. I don't know how you do that with a 50-year-old baby, but I don't know. And on this note, I think they need to stop relying on the cultural goodwill of the Mando and Baby Yoda dynamic. That was cool for 2 seasons, and then they wrapped up the story, and it was really nice, and it was really sad, and it worked, and it had a really satisfying ending. Then they uprooted that, and then now we're here. The cultural fall off of Baby Yoda as being like a thing that people like and talk about is kind of insane. Like, how do you that brought back Star Wars? It revived it. It was really nice, and then just like it tanked so fast. It's crazy. It honestly like makes me wince a little that they're harkening back to that so much from the first 2 seasons, because like we should be past this. But yeah, I think there needs to be an actual change in their dynamic. If this is just running on the fumes of the season 2 finale, then I think this movie is doomed. So with that said, let me just run through some of the highlights and then some of the concern. Production value looks pretty good. We'll see how it works like as an actual movie, but it looks fine. It still has that kind of TV show quality, and I don't know how to describe it. Maybe film people can leave comments and tell me, like, how do you put into words the kind of Disney Plus quality? I don't know how to do that yet. There are some nods to the story mattering in some grand scheme of things. Most notably, the presence of the Hutts. I think that was really cool. And this gets to my point about world building. We need something. We need to know what the Senate is doing. We need to know what the Jedi are doing. We need to know what the Empire is doing on a higher level than we actually have gotten. It's no more breadcrumbs, no more like seeding things to sprout later. We just need like a good story that tells us things. And so if this movie focuses on the galactic underworld, then great. And ideally for me, that would be like, how is the Hutt cartel doing in the wake of Jabba's death? How do they feel about the New Republic and the resurgent Jedi, given that it was them that took out their top guy? What contact do they have with the Imperial warlords? In the canon expanded universe, this cool tidbit from one of the novels about how after Jabba's death, the Nikto, these people here who traditionally have been Hutt slaves, broke free and started their own enterprises. Like that's a cool thing. Could we work in that detail? The action looks good. He shoots that guy, which gets to my point about a tone, maybe like a little bit more grim, a little bit more dark. There's a lot of creature stuff and it looks pretty cool, like a lot of aliens. Moving on to my concerns, maybe a little too much of the creature stuff. This may be, once again, a prequel kid thing of me, but I'm not a fan of all of the aliens being like fantasy monsters. Prequel aliens, at least some of them, are very human, which allows you to do more with them as characters, not just sort of spectacle. I'm getting flashbacks to the sequel era hype around practical effects, which is nothing compared to a meaningful story within the film itself, you know? Once again, the marketing is relying very heavily on the whatever goodwill is left from the father-child dynamic. We're really laying it on thick, and I didn't quite like it. But my biggest concern, honestly, is about the name. This is the thing that made me roll my eyes the most when I heard about this movie for the first time. We're continuing with the superhero movie style of name, which goes for character recognition over anything else. You got this with Solo, which is a movie I've defended and quite like, but also all the Disney Plus shows. The problem with that is that Star Wars has always been about plot and world as much as about characters. What I fear is that they're banking on character appeal to sell a mediocre movie, which is basically the MCU strategy for most of the MCU. And if that's what they're doing, if they're just trying to tell like a mess story but relying on the fact that you just want to see the Mandalorian in action and Baby Yoda, obviously there's no shot that is not going to work, because the word of mouth for this movie will be bad if that's the case. And word of mouth needs to be great. A mid-tier phase 2 MCU movie or whatever is not going to cut it. Star Wars, like I said in my Fantastic Four video, needs just consistent home runs, and this looks like it might be a triple at best. Speaking of Fantastic Four, I think the safest bet with predicting anything about this movie is that at best it will be a lot like last summer's Superman and Fantastic Four. Pretty good, with some standout moments. It symbolizes the company kind of moving in a better direction. They're lightly crowd-pleasing, but without the heavy-hitting staying power that the franchise as a whole really needs. That's better, absolutely, than another Mando Season 3 or Rise of Skywalker, but for reviving the brand, I think there's a long way to go. That's all for me today. This kind of interrupted me working on another video about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, so stay tuned for that. If you like this, please like, subscribe, comment. It really helps the channel, and I really love getting into all the conversations. It's been really fun over my last few videos. I have a review of Markiplier's Iron Lung if you haven't seen that yet, or if you have and you want to talk about it. There's some great conversations in the comments if you want to get into those. Thank you for watching, God bless, and have a great rest of your day.